Computers have used command line interfaces for decades. Microsoft traditionally had what they called the command prompt, where you could type in commands, and it had limited programming and scripting capabilities. A while later, Microsoft introduced PowerShell. So PowerShell is Microsoft's preferred scripting environment today. So we'll go over PowerShell, talk about how it works, talk about how to use it, how to launch it, how to learn how to use it. Back in the day, a lot of Microsoft administration was done using graphical user interfaces. So if you needed to install something, you launch the installer, you click next, 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 configure a few options, and then you're done. So that was how users installed software, but it was also how administrators configured servers. Well, that doesn't scale very well. If you have 1,000 servers and if you have to log into 1,000 of them and you have to click next, 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 do all that good stuff, it can take a really long time to configure things. So Microsoft introduced PowerShell to help streamline operations. So administrators could configure thousands of machines by running the same PowerShell commands in a repeatable way on many devices. So automation is a big reason why Microsoft invented PowerShell. It used to be Windows only, but because most environments run a mix of Windows and Linux, maybe some Mac systems, Microsoft has ported PowerShell to these different environments. You don't see a lot of Linux users using PowerShell frequently, and I doubt that's going to change very quickly, but you can run PowerShell on Linux. One thing that's great about PowerShell is that Microsoft designed it from the ground up. So they were very consistent with their conventions and the naming of their commands. They typically follow a verb-noun syntax. For example, here we have get child item. So get is the verb. What are we getting? We're getting child items. Well, what are those child items? They're not toys or anything, but it's like children of the file system. Like your child items could be files or directories. Or if you're working in a database, the child items could be records in a database. We've got remove computer. If somebody's laptop has died and you need to delete it from your directory, you could remove that computer. You can write to the host screen. You can get file hashes. You can get help, revoke file share access. The idea is just that it's verb-noun. So it really helps learn the language over time. There are lots of aliases. So sometimes you can use one command, like the dir command is an alias for get child item. So there's lots of ways to mix and match. This is different than the Linux environment, where all these separate programs were built by hundreds of different people all over the world, each with different opinions. And generally speaking, they work very well, but it's not quite the unified environment. So let's get into it. There's a couple ways that we can run PowerShell. The most common way, if you right-click on your start menu, find that super secret administrative menu. Here we get Windows PowerShell. Newer versions of Windows might give you the Windows terminal, and that's okay. You can launch the terminal. If you launch the terminal, by default, it should give you PowerShell in your terminal. That's okay. Everything's going to be fine. So now we have a PowerShell prompt, and let me see. All right, I just wanted to zoom in, and I think by doing that, I pasted my old password. By the time you see this, it'll be an old password. That's fine. So we've got, you can see PS, that means PowerShell. This differentiates it from the command prompt. And I can see my current working directory. I'm in my C drive, in my home folder. I'm in the users administrator directory. Your background, it might be a different color. It's probably blue. It's black here on this version. Totally fine. No, the color does not matter. Let's just run our first commandlet. Let's run get-child item. Notice that my case does not match the example there. Windows doesn't care if it's uppercase, lowercase, any of that good stuff. not case sensitive in our Windows environment. So I could run get child item, case doesn't matter, that command's going to run. All that does is it lists the child items of the administrator folder. So these child items, they could be folders or files. Like, looks like I only have one file here, a packet tracer file. So it's got a length there. The ones that don't have a length, those are directories here. So if I open up Windows Explorer, I can take a look at my home folder. So if I go to my computer, see users, administrator, I see this same stuff. Looks like that's hidden. I'm viewing hidden files here in Windows Explorer. So ntuser.dat did not show up in PowerShell. We could view it if we showed hidden files in PowerShell specifically, but these line up. Essentially what we're doing is in PowerShell, we're looking at the contents of this same folder here. So case doesn't matter. We can write host in quotes, hello world. What's going to happen? Well, it prints it out. Well, why is that useful? In this case, it's not all that useful, but if we were creating a file that had a lot of PowerShell commands and we wanted to update our status periodically, we might want to write this out. We can use filters, so we can pass parameters or options. So if I run GCI, that's an alias for get child item, a lot less typing. GCI star.txt, well, I don't have any text files here, so it doesn't show me anything because nothing matches that filter. So the star as a convention matches everything. And then if we put a period txt, it'll only match files that have a .txt extension. But we can do another filter. If we do GCID star, that'll give me everything that starts with a D. Now, is that case sensitive? What if I make it a lowercase d? Also works. So Windows, again, even in those filters, not case sensitive here. All right, I'm going to tells me to close my window. Why am I closing my window? I've got some formatting here. I'll fix that formatting. If I try to run update help here, update help, something's going to go a little bit wonky. It's taking a little bit, but eventually I should see an error message. If I were to get an error message, all I'm trying to do is update the help documentation. I just need a little bit of help, PowerShell. Help me out here. All right, in this case, because I have administrative rights, it's going. The server version is working a little bit differently than it might on your desktop. I see it's updating all these help. PowerShell has a really good built-in help. Oh, there we go. Failed to update a couple of things. That happens fairly frequently. On your desktop, if running update help doesn't work, it might be because you didn't launch PowerShell with administrative permissions. So there's a couple ways to do that. I'm going to close PowerShell. It's important to do this even if it worked for you. If I right-click on the Start menu, notice we have two options. We have Windows PowerShell and Windows PowerShell Admin. Running PowerShell with administrative rights removes a few protections that PowerShell has built in to prevent you from making some substantial changes to your system. Let's say, I'm going to pause and zoom this in. So I ran it as an administrator, so now I can update help. If you try this with your regular user account, it might have failed the first time. I'm going to run it again. It's okay if some of the modules, the help for those modules, don't get their help updated. That just always happens with PowerShell. Okay, so important to know how to launch PowerShell as with administrative rights. But now I'm going to close that and I'm just going to launch PowerShell. Right click on that Start menu, launch PowerShell with regular writes. And I'm holding down the control key, and I'm scrolling down on my trackpad just to zoom in a little bit, just to make this a little bit more readable. Now we can use get help. Understanding how to read documentation is important working with any technology. So if I get help, get child item, this says show me the help specifically for get child item. And I can hit return, and it's going to tell me how this command works. So I can scroll up and I can read all of this. Learning to read the documentation is a skill. If I look at the syntax, it looks there's a whole bunch of stuff. All of this stuff in brackets, like I've got this filter, and the filter is of a data type string. I don't have to provide that filter. If it's in brackets, it means optional. Even if I provide a filter, I don't have to say dash filter. If I don't want to, I can just provide the string, that text of the filter. So what that means is I can run GCI just with alone, and it's going to work. I could run GCI D star, that's a filter. I could run GCI dash filter D star, and that does the same thing. If I provide dash filter here, it's just more explicit. So if I'm writing a PowerShell script that somebody else has to understand, maybe I'm going to write that out so that they understand what that D star is doing, that it is a filter. But if I'm just being efficient, lazy, take your choice, I don't have to do that. One good thing about PowerShell is that they all come with examples. So if I run get help, and I'll use the alias for get child item, GCI, dash examples, every single command by law of Microsoft has to give you examples of different ways that you can use these commandlets. So you can scroll up, they've got like, I'll just pick a, we'll skip the registry. Get child item, the path is C test logs, and it's excluding everything that starts with the letter A. Okay, good. That's example 5. Get child items using the exclude parameter. So there's tons of ways to use PowerShell, and the help is very good. Now, if you want to write PowerShell scripts and save those scripts, you can use the ISE, that's the integrated script editor. So let's go ahead and launch that. In the start menu, we can just, if you search for ISE, this will be on your Windows computer. It's come with every computer since Microsoft launched PowerShell. We can create a new script. So I'll create this new script here. It'll call it untitled.ps1. So PS1 for PowerShell. It doesn't matter your PowerShell version. Your scripts would be named PS1. And now I can write commands here. And I can run them line by line. So I've got my cursor on line 1 here. If I just want to run this one line, I can right click and I can say run selection. Now I haven't selected the line, but because my cursor is on that line, it's going to figure it out. So if I'm making a complex line and I want to run it multiple times, I can use this, or we can make multiple lines. I'll just show this sample code here. Files equals get child item, and I'm going to capitalize it because I want it to look pretty here. Then I'm going to write host done loading files, and then I can calculate the hash of all those files. I'm going to use the vertical pipe character to get file hash, and if you're not sure what this is doing, don't worry about it. I'll select those 3 lines. I'll right click and I'll run selection. And it'll run those 3 lines together. So I'm doing multiple operations. So this is kind of like a miniature program. I would call this a script because this is a program that's not compiled. It's just a small program that's doing one very specific thing for me, and it works just fine. Notice when I ran this code, I didn't get a traditional prompt. Instead, what PowerShell does, it takes this code and it runs it using the working directory in that bottom half of the screen, the blue area of the screen, let's call it. So this script ran inside my administrator directory. If I cd into downloads, change directory to that downloads folder in that bottom half, I could run that same code again, but it's going to run it in my downloads folder. So I've got, looks like I never deleted my Chrome setup or some of those files, so it's calculating the file hash of the files inside my downloads directory. So same code, but I just changed the working directory and it ran just fine. So the ISE is good. I spent in industry many hours in this ISE writing scripts to help automate infrastructure. So our administrators didn't have to sit there and click. They could just run a script, save themselves hours and hours of work. So I'd encourage you. GCI is probably the most important commandlet. It's kind of one of the first ones that you would use. It would be used all the time. Take a look at the help. Take a look at the examples. Try to wrap your brain around the syntax. Practice reading the documentation, because reading the documentation is a skill. If you learn to read PowerShell documentation, you can read the documentation for Python, for Java, for tons of different utilities. So PowerShell is really important. One reason why PowerShell is important is because hackers are starting to use it. So one of their techniques, because PowerShell is powerful and it can do so much, if a hacker can convince you to download a PowerShell script and run it on your computer, they can do things with PowerShell like updating your files, downloading programs, installing things, all the kind of things an information technology administrator would do. But instead, it's a malicious hacker doing it on your computer, kind of like they're a malicious IT employee. So we have to be careful with PowerShell. The royal we, people in the security space, have to make sure that the PowerShell that we are downloading and running isn't doing anything bad on our machines. So it's good to know how to read PowerShell and understand what it's doing, so we can say like, yeah, this doesn't look right. Like, I'm not happy with what this script is doing. All right, that's it for now. Hopefully you feel comfortable starting a PowerShell prompt without administrator permissions. You can start a PowerShell prompt with administrator permissions, which is going to give you expanded read, write access and the ability to make changes. And you can launch the script editor, highlight some lines in that script, and you can run it. And if you're not sure what all the syntax in here does, don't worry about it. We'll get into the syntax a little bit more later.